Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on the podcast app of your choice. My guest for today is a podcaster and writer from Wrestling Headlines, my first returning guest actually. It's my partner in crime, Matt Maher, aka Imp. And we are looking at the Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle in a blood and guts match from Dynamite, 5th of May, 2021. How are you going today, Imp?
I'm so nice you booked me twice.
Oh, there you go. Don't say I never do anything for you.
Yeah, I'm doing good. We've got a slightly different tone to address it the last time I was on.
That was the first thing I was going to ask. Last time you were here 2 weeks ago, we looked at Orange Cassidy versus Pac. You could not have picked a match with a more different tone. Why did you pick Blood and Guts to go through with me today?
So being that I live in the UK, I'm assuming you're something similar, where don't often stay up to watch Dynamite. It's not really on at the best hour, given it's like on a Wednesday. And for me, it's Wednesday at like 1 a.m. So like, I got to get up the next morning. I'm not going to stay up till like 3 watching wrestling. It's like as much as I'd like to, as much as I see other UK people staying up late, just other people covering it. I'm just like, no. I've got responsibilities. I can't be doing this. However, I made an exception for Blood and Guts. The way that they set up the entire match, I was really looking forward to it, to at least see what they did with it, because we had it taken away last minute in 2020. So just to see what were they going to do with it. And then it happened, and it was the most hyped I felt leaving an AEW show that I stayed up for, which again is a small bracket because I don't often stay up. Yeah, it felt like a really special moment. I think the fact that I don't often stay up with AEW, that kind of helps it kind of stay in that kind of special bubble for me for a night while I stayed up to watch professional wrestling, and I had an absolutely amazing time. Afterwards, I was just full of hype and DMing different people. It's like, this was amazing. I loved it.
For me personally, I don't know what's worse, yours or mine. Probably yours, actually, because it happens when I'm at work. So it happens about the middle of the day on a Thursday for me here on the east coast of Australia. So typically I think I've watched maybe 2 matches live, and typically I will just do everything I can to avoid spoilers. Now this one was one of the special ones where I uninstalled Twitter from my phone, because sometimes just by reflex you as I was telling Rich a number of weeks ago now, sometimes just by reflex you accidentally open something up and then you see, oh, Miro's just debuted. Great. Thanks. That's a great. I didn't know that was going to happen. I do now. I guess I'll see it when I watch tonight. So you can't get spoiled when you're asleep, I guess. But certainly watching it live is doable for me. I just have to take a day off work. Whereas for you, it involves copious amounts of caffeine and staying up and ruining your sleep cycle. So I think you've probably got the edge for me there. But this was certainly one where if I could have, I would have watched it live, because, man, there was so much hype around this match. And it's interesting to say that you came out of it super hyped, because as we'll get into when we hit the end of this match, it wasn't necessarily the experience everyone had. But obviously, there were certainly some people who loved it. And by way of introducing the match, as we do every week here on the definitive AEW Match Guide podcast, we introduce it with the flowers that it earned. So Big Papa Dave Meltzer, gave it 4.5 stars for Wrestling Observer. On Grapple, those mean bastards at Grapple rated at 3.95 currently.
0.95.
Yeah, Grapple are harsh, man. Grapple are harsh. That's what I'm finding out doing this thing. Cage Match, 7.48. And on the definitive match guide that we did earlier this year that you can find on WrestlingHeadlines.com, the top 50 matches of AEW history, it came in at 37th. So a pretty decent showing for it there. Just with the 37th, Imp, you're one of the people who voted for it highest. Do you think that was fairly placed, or how do you feel about that?
Personally, for me, it's higher, but I'm somebody where if if the story you're telling is done absolutely perfectly and the rhythm of the match is absolutely perfect, but the stunt at the end isn't quite, either the production is not quite right with it, which I think was the case with this one. They just shot the wrong camera angle, because the immediate replay angle is the one they should use.
Yep.
It happens. Those production things. That's what I meant when last time I was on. I was talking about how you saw those kind of errors in the production that were still taking place recently, but this was one of them. It's just a production botch, and it sucks. They shot from the wrong. They cut to the wrong camera that showed just way too close of an image.
Yep.
But the actual story of everything they told, the entire match.
Yep.
For me, it's pure hype and mayhem, and there's no incorrect beat with it. The push, the Mufasa moment for MJF when he does that, just like it's every beat for me is so damn good, and it creates a super villain in the process. It's that's why I put it in my top 10 AEW matches of the year, because it really was that great, that amazing. And I didn't enjoy War Games that year. The one, it was War Games before it. So the fact that I did like this match as much as I did, it felt like a breath of fresh air to me, because I hadn't been enjoying the two ring things that AEW did one, and it was one of my favourite things ever.
Well, you've just answered all of the questions I was going to put to you today. So we've been the different. I'm kidding. We are nothing if not paying attention to detail here at the Match Guide podcast. So we will get into depth, but look, I'll keep my powder dry for it, and we'll definitely dig more into all of those things that you spoke about there, just as, I guess, the build for this. And this match, the build for it goes all the way back to an early investor call before Dynamite was even happening for WWE, where someone asked Vince McMahon what they thought about AEW, and he happened to mention that they weren't necessarily similar to WWE. They're more of a blood and guts promotion. So what does AEW do? They make a match out of blood and guts and a t-shirt out of it, and being the carnies that they are, they use it for all that it is worth. Of course, this was one of the most hyped match types, because it was originally scheduled for 2020 for the Elite versus the Pinnacle. It was going to be a really big match, but literally the week that it was going to happen was when everything had to go into lockdown. And I do remember them trying to think, like, can we do this with limited crowds? And it just ended up being like, no, we cannot do this. And it was originally scheduled for the Elite versus the Pinnacle. It was going to be Cody, Hangman, Kenny, and the Bucks in there against the Inner Circle. Of course, as we know, that did not happen. And it was then set up off the back of what became a year-long program of MJF first joining the Inner Circle, sort of sowing different seeds of discontent throughout it, trying to take over it in some ways, trying to kick people out of it, and then revealing at the end that he, the whole time, never actually wanted to be a member of the Inner Circle and was instead setting up the Pinnacle, which was his stable that he would have with Tully Blanchard, Wardlow, Shaun Spears, and FTR, Dax Harwood, and Cash Wheeler. Goodness me.
There you go. Got it invented.
I've got it written down here. And they had a number of segments together, but this was actually the first match that they had together, was in War Games. So I don't want to go into until the end of it, like, was that the right decision or not? So keep your powder dry on that, Imp. But what did you think of the build up to this actual match? You've already said you were very hyped, but specifically, going into detail, why were you so hyped for it?
It's one of those that had bubbled and twisted really well, because it started with MJF, that realization everybody's in a stable around here. It looks like I'm going to have to get into a stable myself. So then kind of politics his way into the Inner Circle.
It's interesting. He says that he wanted to do it because he thought everyone was in a stable. But the reason that he did actually want to join a stable was because he got beaten by Jon Moxley in a one-on-one match. And I think what he realized was that he can't do it by himself. Which is an interesting chink to the MJF character that I do hope to explore later on, that, under this facade is potentially some insecurity beyond this facade that he puts out there. But I'll let you keep going there, Imp.
Just get me all excited for MJF Darby Allin. Just all the ways it can go.
Oh, mate. Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, and you talk about insecurities, MJF versus champion Hangman Page. Oh dear. Anyway, let's get back on track. But yeah, so MJF part of the inner circle. That's what causes the inner circle's gradual face turn. As like Sammy Guevara first. A moment during this, which I just will always remember, of Sammy Guevara making that decision on the stage to walk down the babyface tunnel. It's like, oh yes, and that's never anything they've explicitly said. It's just purely by action, you know what's happened. Oh, so damn good. Visual storytelling at its best. But yeah, that slow realization of MJF doing the con and Chris Jericho. It was like that one segment where it was the double triple turn. It's that different twists at every corner. Where you think MJF, Sammy Guevara comes out and he outs MJF, but then MJF goes, I knew you were going to do that, and does a full twist. But to which then Chris Jericho was, I knew you was going to do that. So Chris Jericho but then MJF, then with another one of, I knew that you knew that I knew I was going to do that. And out come the Pinnacle full attack. And
it's like a Scooby-Doo ending where they're just pulling different masks.
Yeah. that Pinnacle attack, I think, sets it up really, really well. And then you get the promos to build up that Pinnacle, and it kind of just launches from there.
Yep. Yeah, the initial Pinnacle beatdown where they just decimated the inner circle, and then they had a really fiery return as well where they the Pinnacle were in a dressing room together. They were discussing, what kind of suits they were going to wear, and MJF opens the door to the bathroom, and it's just like two of the inner circle are there, and he closes it, and he goes to the other door, and there's more inner circle there, and they just go mental on each other. I think one of them gets busted open hard, and there's just blood everywhere, and it's really gritty and really intense stuff. And the resolution to it, not even the resolution, but the start of the resolution to it is going to be this match type that has been teased, as I said, throughout, and it's something that I think people are really excited for, given how they did so well with the initial cage match between Cody and Wardlow, and with the intensity of this rivalry. It really felt like it had earned a blood and guts match and felt fitting for a blood and guts match, even though the blood and guts match was the first thing that kicked it off. I was also, I think everyone was super hyped for this show and this match itself. Getting into the actual match, I wanted to ask, because you said, with the WWE, you didn't feel the double ring setup. It didn't necessarily hit for you. What did you think of the setup that AEW had?
Again, part of it is the production and the way that they presented it, because it is just two rings with a big cage around it, so it's pretty much the same. But like the differences I've noticed with both the AEW cage and this double cage for blood and guts, they give room on the edge of the ring. Instead of it like lowering to a point where you can't really go on the ring apron, they give them room to do that, because they know the style that they wrestle. They're going to have bouncy people, to put it nicely. So they give room for them to be able to do that. It's a nice little touch to fit their style. I personally quite like it. And the WWE one's fine for their style. So it's two things that I like. But for me, the difference is the filming of it. The way AEW filmed it was to make it look as large and grand as possible. Yep. And you saw it during the show as well, where they got the camera shot where it pans up with like blood and guts written on a pane of glass, and it kind of like pans really low angle, and it panes up to see the massive cage. When they're in the cage as well, the way that they film it is to make it look as long as possible. See the two different people at either side of the cage feel like they're miles apart from each other. Yep. Compared to WWE, where it's the same production as every other match, it's just they're down to the cage here, so we do it. They adapt to the cage obviously, but it's the same style of production. AEW changed up their game to specifically make the cage look as large as possible. Yeah,
certainly it feels like there's a bit of extra space. Of course, the biggest difference is the roof on top. AEW has a roof on top of theirs, harkening back to the old War Games of WCW era. And however, this cage, I haven't watched all of the WCW War Games matches, but the ones I have seen, cage is significantly lower than the one that it is here, which, as you said, suits the style that AEW is going for. It's still quite a high cage. One of the things I don't like about this cage and all the cages that AEW uses is I don't like that people get trapped in the side of it. I don't know. There's just something about that to me that just doesn't feel. I don't know. It doesn't feel right to me. I don't know. How do you feel about it? How does it make you feel?
I guess the only emotion I get from it is when someone gets chucked into it and you can see them maybe nearly go down the side. I'm like, oh, because that's obviously going to hurt. I'm more scared for the performer to accidentally get kind of like an arm caught or something.
Yeah.
That's the.
I mean, in this match, Santana and Ortiz both get trapped in the side, and it's, I don't know. I don't like that about the AW cage. That's a personal preference. If they wanted to fix it, I'm sure they could, but they've chosen not to. So that's the way they go. Of course, with the presentation of both teams here, you've got the Pinnacle in all white, which is fantastic for bleeding buckets onto, and Inner Circle in prison outfits with their names on it, and then local prisons from where they were born, where they grew up, printed on the back as well. Very nice touch, and Proud and Powerful, of course, they've busted out the dead president's face paint, which they do for their biggest matches and when they mean business. One of the interesting things I liked about this contrast was the Pinnacle wearing all white. What they represent in their minds is this sort of pure wrestling style. Like, they are about traditional wrestling. They're not pure guys, obviously, but they've got a pure mindset for wrestling. Whereas the Inner Circle, they've got scars, they've got history. They know they're not the most savory people, and they know they're reformed now, but they still wear their history on their backs, for all to see. Just as Chris Jericho admits in the build-up, I can't remember if it's the build-up to this match or another one, where he says, like, I know I've pissed off a lot of people, and at one point brings back Mike Tyson. I can't remember whether that's before or after this match, but I think it's after. But that sort of fits that ethos of, these guys, they're gritty, they are badasses. They've got the bikers and the security turning up on motorbikes and that, but they're reformed as well, and they're not afraid to admit it. And I like that contrast in the styles. And yeah, as I said, the white also works fantastically for bleeding on you.
I think part of it as well is the modern day villain of the faux good guy with the white gear. The white gear has worked recently really well for the baddies in wrestling. They just kind of adopted it. I feel like there's a social kind of shift that's happened that makes that actually it's going to lean into the case.
There's a fantastic line in it's a Jerry Lawler line in the WrestleMania 20 Triple Threat where Triple H is wearing white boots and he's like spruiking for Triple H and he goes, "Good guys always wear white." Yeah. Of course, you've got the Pinnacle's theme song, and then you've got Judas. For me, Chris Jericho just enjoys people singing his song a little bit too much, given that it's a really serious match. But he literally sings his own song. I kind of understand where he's coming from, so I'll take that. But yeah, big match setup here, big feel to it. Very nice. I love the gold trim on Shaun Spears' gear. Just before we move on from the gear and from the setup, I love the gold trim and white. That's a fantastic look there.
Even the steel chair had a white seat on it with his logo. Quite like that as well. Yep,
that's true. That's true. The chairman, of course. Now, Dax Harwood versus Sammy G to start. Fantastic opening combination. We won't be going into everything, of course, but I think it's worth going through these early sequences because they do set the tone early. Sammy G kicks things off. Actually, I should mention that Sammy G cut a fantastic promo the week before this talking about how he's going to go in first because he's just so pissed off at how Maxwell has treated the Inner Circle and treated his friends. So he's fired up, ready to go in. And Dax Harwood's fresh off having a absolute banger with Jungle Boy in a one-on-one matchup earlier in the year. So, they're both just frothing to get at each other. And as soon as the bell rings, Sammy G kicks things off by leaping over both ropes in the middle, taking out Dax. Crowds just blows the roof off immediately. Early on, Dax goes for a pin, then remembers he can't use it. Just that default, that reflex to go for that. They're exchanging blows. Dax is already bleeding before anyone else can even get in the cage. From the word go, it's absolute chaos. Of course, the Pinnacle already know they're going to get the advantage. Why you'd ever give the faces the advantage, I don't know. Wrestling always have a double-sided coin. Just as Spears is about to enter with the chair, Sammy hits a springboard cutter so he can then go one-on-one. Sammy gets the upper hand until Dax gets back, distracts Sammy, and then Spears hits him with a brutal headshot with the chair. There are some real hard headshots in this. And the Pinnacle take over. And we then sort of get into the rhythm of the match, or at least the initial part of the match, where, of course, you've got the fire and desire of the Inner Circle guys coming in. Ortiz comes in next, just lobbing chairs around to get things back on equal ground. Spears and Guevara hit a really incredible Spanish fly where they're both balancing on the ropes of the double rings. But because the Pinnacle keep getting that advantage, they use that to get the advantage. The Inner Circle catches up, and then the Pinnacle advances. They did a fantastic job of setting that up early, setting the scene with like really gritty and fiery sequences. What do you remember from early on in the match, Imp?
It's the setting up of what's to come later. The entire first half is amazing foreshadowing for what's about to happen later. As you were saying, the first chair shot of the many. Just to let you know, there are going to be chair shots in here.
And it's a brutal chair shot. It's like a Rock Mick Foley 99 Royal Rumble level of unprotected. Well, I don't know. I can't remember if he got his hands up or not. I didn't put that in my notes, but it's a brute of a headshot. And
the Dax, just the little thing of the Dax pin. Now everybody knows there's no pin, so everyone's in.
Yep.
You just do that little thing and everybody's aware of it. And there's nothing to the bell rings. It gives the chance for the commentators to just get across. Even though they've done it already with Justin Roberts before the match, they get it across in the match again, just so everybody's on the same page. At this point, if you've not caught on to the fact that there's no pins and nothing happens to the bell rings, this is on you, because they've explained it so many times. And they've visually shown you a pin not working. So I don't know what else to say.
The referee didn't even count it. Didn't even try and count it.
Yeah, like the slow escalation of violence. Dax immediately bleeding to let you know there's going to be blood. And boy, was there blood. It's just... and the dynamics of whenever the heels, their person comes in, obviously they have the upper hand, because that's how these matches always work and should always work, because when they've tried it the other way, it's just not worked. It's a level of predictability, but the other side of the coin, it just doesn't work. So you got to run with it with these matches. The other pattern doesn't flow right.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the way that it all built, and you know what pattern's coming to that point. So then when the big boys start to enter as well, it's a completely different dynamic, but you're kind of set up to the flow of the match for the second half. And again, the escalation of violence, the messiness of the match as well. For me, there's a really nice messiness to it. It really adds to the brawly style. Some just straight up botches of, that sucks. Like Sammy Guevara just face planting when trying some form of springboard. It didn't happen. Or whatever cut up Cash Wheeler. I can't remember what that was, but he was bleeding pretty heavily.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what did you think of the blade work in this match? There was some sloppy stuff, man. Cash Wheeler's blade job looks just gnarly.
Some were better than others. It's the best way to put it. Yeah,
that's probably a good way of putting it. Yeah. It's impossible for us to go over every beat of this match because, as Imp said, it was chaos, and that's what it was meant to look like. And those botches, I think, like, to me, obviously you don't want everything to be botchy, but the odd botch just can sometimes add just like an element of grit and realism. And for me, that worked in, this chaotic environment. Maybe something does catch his eye at the last second, so he, misses doing this precise athletic maneuver that he might nail every other time, but there's just so much going on around him. And, who's to say that somewhere over on the other side of the ring, someone hasn't hit the ropes and that's affected his balance Anyway, like some things that stood out to me is Cash grinding Ortiz's face up against the cage while Santana's on the outside just blowing an absolute gasket. And I just love that because you just know who's the next guy that's going to be coming in. Santana's going to be coming in like, a minute's time, and he's frothing at the mouth seeing this. But at the same time, Cash is like trash talking him while grinding his mate up against the cage. Ortiz grinding barbed wire into the faces of Harwood and Wheeler. Just, as we said, there's blade jobs and there's barbed wire. And then, of course, Wardlow destroying everyone when he comes in. And then on the other side, Jake Hager comes in, destroying everyone, and then them squaring off. What are just some of the spots that stood out for you, Imp?
I guess even one which was another botch as well, where they're all jumping on Wardlow, and he goes, I think he goes to get someone up on his in a carry, and he just kind of collapses a little bit and goes for it again. But the whole point is, then he's collapsed, he's gone for it again. No, that's the indie thing of, we'll just do the spot again. It's like, oh, that sucks. But it accidentally, in terms of a nice botch, it put him over as a big, strong guy because he fell over, got back up, whilst all of the inner circle around him, so they just jumped him again. Just kind of did that thing of like, oh, he is a big boy, isn't he? Yeah, it takes a long to take him down. And that was a real high point as well. Again, if you rip up the ring mat, that's always going to add a sense of danger.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a bit. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, like, as we've said, the action was fantastically chaotic in a really good way, and I do like the tone that it set. However, I did feel like at times you could see the seams of this match. This is not necessarily even me just thinking with my critical brain, in that, like, you could see these spots they'd set up, but then in between them, sometimes it felt a little bit aimless, particularly as the match went on. And I felt the first time that reared its head was, as I said, I really liked how they had like Wardlow and Hager squaring off. But one thing I disliked was that when Hager gets in, he's like destroying everyone on his side, and Wardlow's kind of just off on the other side of the ring, just stomping. And they've obviously set it up that, like, to set up this mammoth battle of the two Titans, they're going to have to just, one side destroys one side, the other side destroys his side, and then they finally meet. For me, I could just see the seams a little bit too much in that particular spot. That was the first one, and there's some others afterwards where you could see what they'd laid out, but maybe didn't happen as seamlessly, and the flow wasn't as good as what I would want, a really high level match to be.
Because that's because even though I've kind of fallen off the WWE, the NXT War Games thing. Those matches normally you never felt those seams really with those matches. That's a very TNA thing actually, like with the TNA lockdown matches. That would often happen there, where you're very blatantly just setting up the next spot. But that was part of that. The TNA style quite often was that very choreographed kind of way to run their matches. And I felt, that definitely did seep into this one. It was definitely there for like a middle portion.
Yeah, I felt it more, honestly. I felt it more towards the end, and then on reflection, saw these other parts when I went to the rewatch and was and sort of noticed this is where it started to seep into the match. And the first one was that Wardlow Hager square off, which, as I said, was very good, and they'd set it up really well in the build with these two guys who initially they did nothing but eyeball each other.
Yeah, so good.
But then you could just see, like, and Hager's just so dumb and he's thick as a plank. But, he's just got this one thing in his mind where it's just like, Hager smash.
They've nailed his character in AEW. Just stare, not very intelligent, but he can beat you up. I like it.
Yeah, as I said, look, that's where it just started to seep in. And I love the tone and I love the chaos, but there was a little bit of aimlessness at times during this. As I said, things start to culminate when Jericho enters. The teams separate out, sort of recovering on their sides before they get into the final setup. And I didn't mind this. It could be contrived, but I didn't mind this because this is when the match can actually end. Everything up until this point has been wearing one another down, slowly entering and setting the scene for the match beyond. I think they called it the all-out assault in this. So they separate, they sort of regather themselves ready for the portion of this match where the rubber hits the road and the stakes are at its highest. And then, of course, they just rush together and start brawling. Different pockets sort of go off, and they are actually immediately trying to get submissions on each other in different ways. Initially, the Pinnacle get an advantage slightly, but, they're all off in different parts, trying to get the submission in their own way. And I really like this because you've got like Jericho choking Spears with the metal strut. So that's like the way he's trying to do it. Wardlow and Hager, they're having like a Kimura and choke battle. So they're like going for very technical submissions, whereas Jericho and Spears are using like the arena, whereas FTR and Proud and Powerful and Sammy and Shaun Spears, they actually rip the ring up, and they're just going for normal wrestling, but they're like, we're going to do it on the floorboards, so you're going to get hurt. And I did like that sort of character element where they've all got different ways they're trying to pull this submission out.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it's just the way that the violence gradually builds within this final part as well, to the point where you come back from advert and you get one of my favourite AEW kind of meme pictures of Chris Jericho on the outside, just with his thumb up, smiling on the edge of the cage. So good.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Oh, I forgot to mention Santana has a fork.
Oh yes, he does. He just stabs him in the.
Yeah, because that's what eventually the inner circle actually are the ones that sort of get on top, but can't get the submission, and they all sort of circle MJF and they all take turns beating him, getting their revenge for how he'd played them for 6 months or however long it had been in the build up. And at this point, I do like the character, because I mentioned before how MJF is smart, but he's someone who knows when he's beaten and knows when he's being bested. That's what happened with Jon Moxley, right? Like, that's the whole reason he wanted to have a stable around him, was because he knew he'd been beaten. And in this match, he knows that he's been beaten. He's getting beaten down by the inner circle, and he decides that he's going to escape. But I don't know if this was pre-planned with Tully, or if he, just told him, or, gave him the word of like, this is what's going to happen. Tully grabs a ref, steals the key, lets MJF out. MJF runs out, tries to escape because he knows that this is not going well for him, and he knows it's not going well. And Jericho manages to follow MJF up, and as you said, he went on the cage. And this was the point where, as I said, I felt like the seams and the cracks started to appear in this match. I felt like the beatdown maybe went on a little bit too long. Felt like they had set out like this is going to have to go for 10 minutes or something when it could have gone 5. And to me, it lost its intensity a little bit in this. Did it for you, 100%. Or were you feeling that intensity the whole way through?
So when I watched it live, the thing that I remembered was that's when they went to ad break. So like the portion before Jericho is on the cage, that's all during the ad break, because it comes back to him on the cage, and it's like a massive, and that is where it lulls. And it's a weird go back to watch, because quite often whenever it does go to ad break, there's a bit of like the first part of the match, not quite as much, but the second part, whenever they would go to ad break in the second half of the match, they would just slow down whatever they were doing. And 100%, that is when you would kind of get that feeling. So it's different watching it on Fight or watching it back on Fight like we did for this. Fight's amazing for AW, by the way.
Yeah.
Everything is all there. But so the whole thing of that kind of portion of it, it's because I was watching it going, okay, I remember this is when the ad break was, and I remember it came back with Jericho already on the side of the cage smiling. that was the shot they returned to. So, but when you're watching it nowadays on Fight, suddenly it starts to lull.
Yep.
So I'm watching it remembering, oh yeah, this is when they went to ad break. But obviously, if you're watching it now, suddenly there's just a lull in the match. So it kind of takes it down a peg.
Yeah, as I said, I'm very torn, because I love there's like some really characterful ways that they're trying to get the submission or the give up, in like Hager and Wardlow doing their MMA thing, because they're both sort of trained in that in kayfabe and in real life. For Hager's perspective, FTR are just doing like this 80s thing of pulling up the ring, and Sammy's just being as athletic as possible because that's how he knows he can do it. Jericho knows, he's the veteran, so he's trying to use the ring. And then once they get the advantage, the inner circle's like punishing MJF for what they've done. But yeah, as I said, like, while it has its really good bits, as you said, it sort of drags, and really like they timed the Chris Jericho climb poorly, because he was paused on that cage, and like
he was
he was paused on that cage. He was visibly like signaling to the crowd to get into it, because he wanted them, when they come back from the break, he wants them to be really alive, because they're about to hit the final stretch of the match. But ultimately, like, we have to judge this on what happened. And given the stakes of this match, given the intensity of this match, that's not what should be happening. He should be like straight away up on top there, trying to get MJF's throat. Before this, they're stabbing him with a fork. So he shouldn't be pausing on the edge for it. So I have to critique that there. I can't let that go. They get on top, and the cameras do. Apparently, there's still stuff going on in the ring.
Yeah, apparently, yeah.
The cameras do sort of focus on this what's happening up the top here, and I think that's fair enough because this is the showdown between MJF and Chris Jericho, the two guys that they're at the center of this animosity and this rivalry. And MJF's facial expressions on top are fantastic when he begs. Amazing. He's begging for mercy and he's got blood dripping down his face. Absolutely brilliant. Jericho gets him in the walls, nearly taps him out. MJF hits a low blow to get out. MJF gets the salt of the earth, trying to get Jericho to tap, but Jericho's not going to get out either because, he's got all that fire and he's got, he's not going to give up in this match. MJF hits Jericho with the diamond ring. Jericho's now bleeding and then threatens to throw him off the cage. And, I love, as I said, the character of MJF really shines through in this match in that, firstly, he knows when he's beaten, so he tries to escape because he's got rat cunning to him. But then also he is actually smart because he could have just thrown Jericho straight off, but he knows that he has to win this match. And to do that, he has to get a verbal submission. And so he uses the bond that he knows that the Inner Circle have with one another against them. And instead of just throwing Jericho off, he threatens to throw him off and, of course, draws the surrender from Sammy G. Before we get into the Mufasa moment, as you put it, what did you think of the ending of the match, Imp?
Personally, I think it's because the issue quite often you see, especially in WWE, when they can't fulfill a promise they're teasing, it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to tease this? Well, no, because you know how foreshadowing works, right? You know how setups work.
Yeah.
If you don't pay it off, the crowd will boo because you can't fulfill a promise and you sense it. They needed something because that's with the increasing violence, with what has been set up throughout the course of the match, there has to be something big at the end. And them going onto the cage fits absolutely perfectly. What on earth are they going to do? But then the teasing of the push, I think, is the absolute perfect note where, but you don't have to actually do the spot. You can just, Sammy's the perfect guy as well, because I can't picture anybody else in the Inner Circle actually giving up at that point. But no. Sammy's the one. He's the one.
He don't care.
Yeah.
Jake Hager's too dumb to do anything.
Yeah. So Sammy's the perfect guy to be screaming no. Again, he's the intelligent one who spotted MJF from a mile away the entire time he was in the Inner Circle.
Exactly.
So again, he is the perfect guy to stand up for this. But the Mufasa moment is such a creating of a super villain, and the camera work around it is amazing.
Yeah, interesting tidbit actually. When Chris Jericho had a Hell in a Cell match against Triple H back in the year 2001, I'm going to say, it also finished on the roof when Triple H pinned him on the roof. So interesting sort of bit of symmetry there. Anyway, as you said, MJF, after getting the surrender, after getting the win, because he is the boil on the arse of life, as JR says, MJF throws Chris Jericho off the top anyway, and Dynamite goes off the air with MJF on the top of the cage, looking like an absolute star, just epic shots of blood dripping down his face, but him eyeballing the camera and slagging off the crowd. And I mean, excuse the pun, this is the pinnacle for MJF right now. Yeah, just incredibly shot. Once we
there's one thing to
MJF, we are going to get to it. Don't worry, guys, we are going to get to it. But MJF standing on the top, his music going off in the background, beautiful stuff, beautifully done.
Yeah, there's because I remember, I swear, I don't know why we were talking about it, but maybe I was just hyped on DM to you as well. I can't remember, but it was just that thing of the way it is shot. It's all of the focus is on MJF. It's all intentional. And yes, they cut to Jericho and Inner Circle kind of just looking at Jericho, but all of the attention is on MJF. And because it's all about this entire match, everything, the last hour of our lives was all about creating MJF the supervillain. And they did it. And it's beat for beat perfect.
Yep.
It's not quite Revolution 2021 kind of ending botch thing to this. Is again another match where every beat of it is absolutely perfect until the production at the final bit, where it's again twice AW amazing matches with just the production at the end, but it's the production around it. Because that's why I was applauding all of the production around the cage, because MJF on top of the cage is just the cherry on top, just the bon appetit as he's just standing there covered in blood. Again, the violence in the cage suddenly sets up the fact that MJF's covered in blood, just the momentum of it all to get onto that cage. And it's, the absolute perfect ending to what they had set up. And it's a stunt big enough to warrant the violence of what had come earlier. It pays off really well. And then you get the MJF evil moment of he gave up, but then he pushed him anyway. It's like, yes, such a good villain.
Such a villain, absolutely. Now, as we said, we will get to it. When Chris Jericho falls, they go to a close-up from this platform that's been installed onto the main stage at Darby's place, and Chris Jericho falls in, and it's clear that this platform is mostly either cardboard or wood, and you can't see a crash pad, but it's obviously protecting a crash pad for him to land. I'm going to say straight up, this would have still hurt Chris Jericho to take. I once did you could even go, you could try and find it on YouTube. I did.
I've clipped it into a podcast.
Oh, fantastic. Thing called Pillow Fight Club, where it was a pillow fight, where I filmed in uni, two mates having a pillow fight, and it finished with them both being on the top of a four-wheel drive car, otherwise known as an SUV everywhere that is in Australia. They were standing on top of that car, and one of them hits it and falls off, and we put a mattress underneath for them to fall onto, and I was the first one to do it, and the first time I took it, it took the wind out of me, and that's only off the top of the car. This was a really high thing. So this would have hurt Chris Jericho, but it did not look good. It wasn't a good look, and this came also, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. This came within a month or so, I'm going to say a month to 6 weeks, of another match that had a big ending planned, the exploding barbed wire death match between Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega, where it also had a production error at the end, really sort of undermined and robbed the match and the ending of some of the gravity. Imp, how much do you think the legacy of this match is harmed by the fact Chris Jericho's fall did look contrived?
Well, seemingly measurably by 0.05 if we go by grapple. It's the one thing people talk about. So this is its legacy, which is same with Revolution. They're both amazing matches.
We're actually going to be looking at that match in a few weeks' time, funnily enough, to just give a preview. But continue on, him.
But so it's that the character arcs throughout the match, the momentum of it, the story that they're telling. The setting up, the escalation, it is all beat for beat perfect. But then the ending stunt, the production's off. So, which is a shame. And it's the exact same for the Revolution Barbed Wire Death match. It is an amazing match. It's incredible. And I would personally say the beat of Eddie Kingston running out to cover Jon Moxley is even better for me personally than the MJF Mufasa moment. Just the raw emotion that came out of me when he did that. It's just but when the production isn't quite there, that's all it's remembered for. Even though they had 30 minutes of amazing storytelling and wrestling and just sucking you in, but the actual moment of now we do the stuff we've been building to. Which they're built to perfectly. But it's just off. But for me, the worst one, the Chris Jericho one, at least with the Revolution one, the entire thing just fails. At least there's that. Like, the only equivalent here will be when MJF pushes him, Chris Jericho is so scared he refuses to. He's like, I can't do it. It
just grabs the edge of the thing and just lets himself down.
So that's the only equivalent I can think of, because here he does the fall. It's all perfect, and then the camera work at MJF is amazing. But the camera they cut to, it just shows it from the ending feels naff, because he lands and you see a comfy landing for him. Doesn't mean it was comfy, but visually it looks it. It doesn't look, oh my God, I've been taken out. It does look like, you're giving him a protective landing. And the worst thing about it is they had the good angle. And the first angle they show on the replay, where it's a bit more of a wide shot, and he's sitting, and they're both small, and you see him do the full forward with the crash. But because you don't see any of the cushions or the whatever it is underneath him pop up, it feels more devastating. That was a camera to cut to, but that's not the cam. And in terms of the first impression of the fall is, I guess, the Kenny Omega reaction for his G1 match with Yano, where he suplexed him onto the corner pads, and he's like, "Oh, actually, that wasn't that bad."
And it's so important to get that first one right, because
yeah,
there are so many of these sorts of stunts that get done, and there's so many that are protected. I mean, obviously the Mick Foley one is not protected, but since then, the WWE, when they've known that there's going to be a big fall happening off the cage of a Hell in a Cell, they've put things in place to prevent it. Or when they've had, like a big fall off a platform or something, Jeff Hardy going off the Titantron, or even, say, for instance, AEW, when Kenny Omega at the end of the Stadium Stampede did the big one-winged angel on Sammy Guevara. They make sure they just nail that first shot. So even though you can see that, Rikishi's falling into a pile of sawdust on a truck with suspension, Shane McMahon's going off some big stand at WrestleMania with The Miz, that initial shot preserves it, and this one didn't, it sucks, because they have the shot that does look good. They have the shot that does look good, but they just didn't use it. And so, as I said, it does harm the legacy of this match, because the immediate aftermath of this match wasn't, whoa, what the heck did we just watch? The immediate aftermath was not, I don't want to get into it.
I was still able to leave hyped, because it's the type of thing where I've been used to the feeling anyway. Like the modern day WWE thing for most of their stunts, apart from cage related stuff, is they won't show the landing. Drew McIntyre versus Randy Orton in an ambulance match, where they're from just last year, where they're boarding the top of the ambulance. One of them got as either suplexed or just lifted over to fall onto the other side of onto the ambulance. They just didn't show the landing. Yeah. The camera's looking up at the thing, which is like the other, when you're trying to think of alternatives or what could they have done. Well, the alternative is to look up as Chris Jericho falls, but also that's you lose the impact. You need the impact, and the thing you learn from in terms of learning from what the competition are doing. When WWE did that, and it's just a little thing in a match. It's not the big final stunt, so it's not entirely comparable. But they've done it in different matches as well, just to show them disappearing behind a structure, and then it's like that. Oh my god, the devastation!
Yeah, you never saw Rey Mysterio or Aleister Black land after they got thrown off the top of Titan Towers. They just sort of showed up next week on Raw.
Yeah. Apparently they landed on a hidden secondary roof, which is one of my favourite quotes. It's just it's amazing. I've come across them in real life, or when I'm playing Warzone with my friends. I was like, oh, there's another roof here. It's like a hidden secondary roof. Yeah. They are real. But yeah, it's just that's their way that they film to get around that. That's the tactic they decide to use. Personally, you need the impact. Otherwise, commentary selling it doesn't work.
Yep.
End of. If you don't show it me, in terms like with the draft this week, commentators acting is speaking excited instead of giving me something exciting. It's not the same. And with the landing, they needed the landing. They were right in terms of that. They needed to show Chris Jericho crashing into something. It just sucks they cut to the wrong camera.
Yeah, and they also, I should add, I also want them to be putting protection in place for these things. Because, I mean, these guys are psychos. They probably will take it. Or maybe not Chris Jericho, but the alternative is, say, Matt Hardy going off that cherry picker and bloody concussing himself on concrete in the middle of a pay-per-view. I don't want to see that. I want them to protect their performers to a degree when they do these things. Just, as we've said, got to shoot it right. Because it does. It robbed this of its gravity. I want to move beyond that because there's more to discuss in the legacy of this match than just that. One of the interesting things about this was a huge and intense and violent match, but it was the first match they had in their feud. How do you feel that affected the rhythm of this feud, Imp?
I remember at the time thinking the fact that it went on as long as it did. And I remember I wasn't excited for Stadium Stampede 2, at all. And then the match happened, and I didn't actually care whilst I was watching it either. It felt like this was as you called it with the accidental pun of, this was a character pinnacle moment for MJF. So the next thing was, it felt, when I say WWE, I just meant they're in a feud, therefore the feud continues type of thing, where it was kind of, they were still building to the singles match. For me, that was the big thing to be going to. I don't think I wanted another multi-man. And if I did want a multi-man, a different kind of thing. I don't think Stadium Stampede was the right way to go, personally. And by the time, and you saw it with the fan reaction, whilst they were still feuding to their big singles match, finally getting there with Jericho MJF, there was a little bit of fan disinterest, I guess. Kind of zone. Yeah, they weren't. I mean, the whatever it's called of Jericho, where they're building to the big singles match.
The Labors.
It was a great. Yeah, it's a great 5 weeks, an amazing peak with the Nick Gage match, but that interest wasn't there just because it'd been stretched out a little bit too long, and maybe part of that is hitting this amazing beat immediately. Like if you do it the other way around, like this builds the Stadium Stampede, then you get the blood and guts match. Maybe it works, but this is an amazing like MJF supervillain setup, which then kind of leads to him being the supervillain during the Stadium Stampede and then to the big singles match. It's an odd one. I think it started strong and ended strong, personally. It's just that middle portion where they stretched it out. So I don't quite know what the legacy is going to be, because it's an amazing first note with, is it an amazing first note for its legacy with the fall? But in terms of MJF's character specifically, there's that amazing elevation of him to supervillain. Then there's the kind of payoff in loss to Chris Jericho there, because that then sets MJF on another character spiral, which is what you need to do to MJF. He doesn't need to be consistently winning, but just consistently onto the next character spiral type of thing.
Yeah, because the logic that Jericho used to sort of, because it did get brought up at the time, and the logic that Jericho used was, we want to kick this off like Appetite of Destruction kicks off with Welcome to the Jungle. And we want to blow the doors off with this feud. But what I don't know, watching back, because we now have the benefit of hindsight, which to be fair, they didn't have then. But this isn't the traditional way to structure a wrestling feud, is go with the biggest, bloodiest match first. And watching this back, I did get the feeling like this would have been such a good way to end it. That the wrestling logic, I think it's right. Like, it's right. And it's lasted so long, and it just proved, because it is right. And knowing the way these two teams interacted, this would have been an incredible way to finish things, because if you can just imagine, if you can supplant some of the stuff that happened individually to the before this, so the interactions between FTR and Proud and Powerful, their interactions that they had after this would have informed this match so much better. Even if you just had this exact same match, like, it would have made the interaction between those two teams in the cage so much better. And same with the Hager and Wardlow stuff. Like, they've had their MMA match, they've had, their big Hoss match, they've had, maybe even the Stadium Stampede's the first thing that they do. They've had their square off, and this is like when they finally come together after decimating each team, like, this is the final square up between these two teams. It was ambitious to do it this way, and good on them for trying, but the traditional wrestling logic is right. A match like this should be at the end of a feud. And I do hope that AEW takes that logic on board and does it that way, because by not doing it that way, by just making it sort of an annual fixture, the end point is what's happened in the WWE now with Hell in a Cell, where it's been robbed of its gravitas. And this is a match that has tremendous gravitas, but you can ruin that. It's not always going to have that if you don't make it happen.
Yeah, and I guess another thing, I think for me personally, it still works if you swap Blood and Guts and Stadium Stampede round. Stadium Stampede always happening at Double or Nothing. Maybe a bit of you don't have to do that. And like when you're watching a big film with multiple characters, or I guess even with the Last of Us 2, where there's so many different characters involved, but then right at the end, you boil it down to your two main characters.
Yep.
And that's what all the movies will do as well.
Yeah, true.
Big massive battle right at the end, but it boils down to just the main two, like the supervillain and the main character right at the end. And they could have done that here easily, as in with everything that's happened. Yeah. Then Chris Jericho forcing himself through the trials.
Because MJF's just thrown him off, right? And so it's perfect if MJF's like, why the hell would I go against you again? Like, you just gave up to me. Like, you didn't. And of course, Chris Jericho's, all fired up because of what's happened to him. And so the labors make perfect sense going straight after this. But they, I said the gravitas that they robbed it of, like Jericho came back the week after and didn't sell the injuries all that much. So, anyway, we've got the benefit of hindsight now, which is a benefit, but, hopefully AEW learns from that as well as they go forward. Couple more questions for you, real quick one. How do you think this compares to the WWE War Games since they relaunched War Games?
There's been some more games that I really enjoyed. I think it was just specifically this year. I even wrote a column before it happened. I was just like, I just don't care this year. Whatever they've done, I feel like that's a major difference. It's become like Hell in a Cell a bit at this point, as in every year there's a War Games at this point.
Yeah,
and I think
it's November, so William Regal's going to scream War Games.
Oh yeah, War Games, as he says every time. But yeah, I think it was fine for the first 2 years, but the most recent one was a bit main rostery in the sense of, oh, this has come out of nowhere. Let's start building to it directly now. It's like, wait, what? Especially with the women's one. The men's a bit different because at least they're doing Adam Cole, Pat McAfee beforehand.
Yeah.
But it's just that thing of, like, where's this pay-per-view come out of nowhere? What do you mean? Like, the schedules are released like a year ahead. You can't be caught off guard by a pay-per-view out of nowhere. That's not how it happens, surely. Surely not. But I got that little sense this year, and the women's one felt extremely thrown together, and it felt a bit more like, watch these people do these crazy cool things, but there's no character gravitas to anything I'm seeing. I'm not sold the reason why these people would really want to beat each other up in this match. It didn't feel like this had been brought together to solve this massive feud. It felt like it's that time of year again for this thing, and these are the competitors this time.
Yeah,
it's not
having the Undisputed Era was the perfect for the first few War Games because this is already a team, and so it's very easy to cobble together a team of faces who happen to be against them, and just make it a combined force against them rather than a singular. Having to have two disparate teams that neither team really has history together. So for me, I guess by direct comparison with the matches, I said before that this one did seem to drag, and I felt like I could see the seams of it. And I didn't get, particularly the first two War Games matches, that I would say they're more spectacular in terms of, much more flash, whereas this was, blood and guts in the title. Like, this was more gritty. This was more intense. And I do think this was more violent as well. So they were different in what they were trying to do. But then also, as I said, I didn't feel the seams of the War Games matches quite as much as I did this one. So there is, there's that as well.
Is that the difference between pay-per-view and television, I guess? In terms of like the rhythm of the match.
Yeah, because of the reality of having the breaks when they needed to. True. That's very true. What do you think the prospects are for a future Blood and Guts, Imp?
Don't do it annually would be my one thing.
Yeah.
Just
agree more.
Yeah, because I think Tony Khan said as well that he'd like to do another exploding barbed wire death match, but same comment for that. It doesn't need to be annual. If you just kind of, as in it gets to summer/late spring and it's like, oh, we haven't done a Blood and Guts yet this year. You don't have to do one. And I feel like keeping it special is a better idea. You saw what happened with WWE, where they had the first Hell in a Cell and it kind of built, but then they started to have it more routinely. It's like, oh, we need to have one every year. And then it got to that point of, well, let's just name a pay-per-view Hell in a Cell. And now it's at that point of, and this year's competitors in Squid Games. Like, it's just not, it lacks reason for it to be in Hell in a Cell other than it's that time of year. And I don't want that to happen with these kind of matches. That's the lesson to be learned. And AEW have shown a really good ability to learn from both, like the WCW past, mistakes TNA made, mistakes WWE have made, and try to implement it in the show. For me, that's my biggest criticism of WWE is they're not learning from their own mistakes. And AEW seem to be, they're not perfect, but they are taking it on board and learning from mistakes, which is massive. And part one of that is don't do Blood and Guts every single year.
given how like faction based AEW is, everyone in AEW has got relationships. They've got friends, they've got allies, and typically they've got multiple people that they are set up against. I think Blood and Guts, will be a regular feature, and I cannot wait to see what the Elite do in a Blood and Guts match. Like what the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Adam Cole, and who's going to be the fifth man this time? I guess Carl Anderson or Doc Gallows, or even why not throw Brandon Cutler in there?
Yeah, with his spray.
Like what those five men could do in the double ring with the double rings and the roof, and I have to see this. Like I really want to see Elite, and who knows who you put them against. I mean, at the moment it's like they're up against sort of a motley crew of Jurassic Express, Bryan Danielson, Christian Cage, and you just why not throw Marco Stunt in there? You could do that right now, or it looks like they're going to be cycling back to the sort of the Hangman Page stuff. So you could have Hangman and the Dark Order against the Elite in a Blood and Guts match. Who knows? I cannot imagine that Cody is not chomping at the bit to get in there somehow. No matter who he ends up against, he'll want to get in there at some point and bleed buckets.
I think personally for me, the one that immediately jumped out of me in terms of what would I like to see, and it definitely feeds into my don't do it every year. But I've got the thing of them. They are slowly building to supervillain Cody as he goes full Homelander. For me, you do Blood and Guts when he's turned full Homelander. As in, like, after that. Obviously, I'm talking like a year and a half minimum.
Yeah.
For him to have turned, to have built up a stable, to have risen to that point. And personally, I would have for at least the next half a year, he's still going, oh no, I'm not going to go back on my word about the title thing. Before he goes back on his word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, if they waited a year and a half, I'd be fine with that. Like, you look how good was it with the steel cage? Like, they waited over a year and a half, pretty much, bang on.
Oh yeah.
They waited a year and a half before they did another steel cage match, and because of that, like, when it happened, it meant a lot. And the matches that have been in a steel cage now, the legacy of a steel cage match is super intense. So the next time that happens, whoever happens to, if Hangman and Kenny end up having a steel cage match, or MJF and someone who have a steel cage match to keep the Pinnacle out, like, that's going to be like, it's about to go down when that happens. So yeah, definitely. Back to the match itself, just to wrap things up. I think my conclusion when I rewatched this is a flawed but great match. There are some flaws to it, as we've pointed out, but as an initial match, like, it really set a fantastic tone for Blood and Guts. And the next time a Blood and Guts match does come up, I think people are going to be really excited for it, in large part because of how good this one was, how violent it was, how gritty it was. And when it happens, maybe it's going to be people putting a different spin on it, but there's going to be energy in the air because of how this match went down.
Oh yeah, and just the way they are building up more and more factions, it gets to that point of they could build up a feud with anyone. Just any of these. You've got the super team of Moxley, Kingston, Sting, and Darby Allin. Can
you imagine what John Moxley and Eddie Kingston would do? And Darby Allin, man, I'm a bit worried about Darby Allin. Actually, he probably would. He'd probably just take it to the concrete. He'd just cop and drop to the concrete.
As in, yeah, if Darby Allin's in that match, he's the one taking the mental bump, whatever it is. He won't need that amount of padding. But yeah, there's so many different ways you can go. And of course, we're seeing small character tweaks right now, like possibly Moxley's doing a slow heel turn or some form of turn to be more aggressive. And you've got Cody with whatever his thing is. You got the new people in. Danielson is kind of falling into an area. CM Punk saying that this happy tour's not going to last forever type of thing. There's so many different avenues you can go down. I think personally the only thing I would do is not have the same competitors. I think that's the only difference I'd have. As in neither the Pinnacle nor Inner Circle.
Yep.
Which is a difference from what we've seen with War Games, where it's like this was the Undisputed Era's thing. This was their match for the initial years. So that's personally what I would do. And leaving it in a year and a half really does give you that time to build that up and go that way anyway.
well, that about wraps it up for both of us, I think. I've definitely said all I can about this match. As I said, flawed but great. Imp, would you like to tell the good people where they can find you?
I would like to tell the good people where they can find me. They can find me on Twitter at the damn Implicat. That's damn as in damn. Also over on Twitch at the Implications with 2 S's. They can also read my columns over at wrestlingheadlines.net. Who knows what I'll be writing at this point. Also, I do the weekly Raw and AEW Dynamite reviews for Wrestling Headlines in both podcast form and over on their YouTube channel. That I do those every Tuesday and Thursday night. And because I'm not mental, I'm not going to stay up late. I'm doing an immediate review. My sleep schedule's bad enough as it is with me just doing Aftershock after the pay-per-views. It's not happening. But yes, I'll be doing those weekly, so you can catch me there. And I think that's everything I got to plug.
And you may catch me on the odd AEW review show as well if you want to find me there. You can also find me at Sir_Samuel on Twitter if you want to come and talk to us about the War Games match, about this match, or any of the matches that we review here on the AEW Match Guide podcast. You can also find the definitive AEW Match Guide on WrestlingHeadlines.com. There'll be a link in the podcast notes. And, of course, you can listen to all of the great podcasts covering all aspects of the wrestling world on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. You can find that in your podcast feeds wherever you go. Next week, we will be covering the Young Bucks versus the Lucha Bros from Double or Nothing 2019, going right back to the start of the promotion. So I'm very excited about that. But thank you very much for joining me this week, Imp. I really appreciate having you on for the second time. And thank you very much to anyone out there who is listening. I really appreciate it. And look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.